welcome to the final session of AED 2025, the blue economy in India's extended neighbourhood. As we gather here today, we're reminded that the oceans are not just vast expanses of water, but they're actually the connective tissue of our region, a shared resource that binds India to its neighbours in the Indian Ocean and beyond. The blue economy, with its promise of sustainable growth, is not merely a national agenda, but a regional imperative, one that demands collaboration, innovation, and a shared vision for the future. And since its introduction at the Rio Plus 20, the concept of the blue economy has evolved into a multi-dimensional framework encompassing everything from renewable energy and aquaculture to maritime security and biodiversity conservation. Yet as we chart this course, we must also confront the storms of overexploitation, pollution, and geopolitical competition that threaten to erode the very foundations of this blue frontier. So for India, the blue economy is not just an economic opportunity, but also a strategic necessity. With her vast coastline, critical sea lines of communication, and growing energy needs, India's maritime interests are deeply intertwined of that of its neighbours. And from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal, and going further, the Gulf of Aden to the Andaman Sea, India's extended neighbourhood is really a mosaic of shared challenges and opportunities. We have initiatives like the Deep Ocean Mission and the Maritime India Vision 2030, which reflect India's commitment to balancing growth with sustainability. But the path forward requires more than national resolve. It demands regional collaboration and a collective approach to governance. So today we are very privileged to have with us a distinguished panel of experts who will guide us through these complex waters, forgive the pun. Chairing this session, we have Dr. Mansi Singh, whose leadership will undoubtedly steer our discussion with clarity and insight. Can we give her a big round of applause, please? Assistant Professor, as you can see, School of National Security Studies, Central University of Gujarat. And joining her on the panel, we have Subhashini Abhay-Singhe, Research Director at the Verite Research Institute in Sri Lanka. We also have Puneet Agrawal, Additional Secretary, Indian Ocean Region at the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. I welcome you to the stage, sir. Big round of applause, please. We also have Dr. Commander Arnab Das, Founder and Director of the Maritime Research Centre, Pune. And we have Greg Johannes. It's over here, yes. Greg Johannes, Chair of the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre of Australia. And together they'll explore how India can navigate these waters, balancing differing geopolitical logics, addressing environmental challenges, and fostering sustainable development in the extended neighbourhood. Dr. Mansi, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vandana, and thank you to the Pune International Centre for including this session on a very pertinent theme and inviting me to chair the session. The term blue economy, as of course she rightly pointed out, since 2012 at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development at Rio de Janeiro has gained considerable traction with states and even regional organizations like EU and the African Union enunciating dedicated strategies to unlock the full potential of their maritime sector. However, we also see that this also stems from a growing acknowledgement of the deeper role that the world's oceans and seas have played in the history of humankind. But we need to make sure that any discourse on blue economy needs to go past the business as usual model, which tends to see oceans and seas as extractive spaces or dumping grounds. But rather, the need of the hour is to see them as development spaces where we integrate marine health, biodiversity conservation, livelihood protection, social inclusion into our economic modeling and decision-making processes. This also resonates resonates well with the principles of equity and inclusion in the governance of global commons. So ladies and gentlemen, interestingly, this decade from 21 to 2030 is the UN decade on ocean science for sustainable development and ecosystem restoration. And I think we are very, at an opportune time for countries like India to lead such conversations and pathways on developing a sustainable strategy on blue economy. And as Vandana also pointed out in her introduction, this is very well illustrated by a series of policy documents that have been brought out. Though for a very long time we were seen to have a continental mindset, but I think over the years we have also demonstrated our alacrity, our earnestness in giving a lot of attention to our maritime sector. So of course the documents, as she also mentioned, whether it's Maritime India Vision 2030, the draft policy paper on India's blue economy Vision 2025, which was brought out by Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries. I think one of the cross-cutting theme that you can find in all these documents is that of sustainability. Something which was also echoed during India's G20 presidency in 2023, where we advocated a greater role for Global South in forging international cooperation on blue economy and prioritizing resilience. So again, this resonates well with this year's Asia Economic Dialogue, the theme, the resilience. And I think when I was asked to draft a concept note for this thematic session, I thought of including pointers that would steer the deliberations on some of these aspects. And my training in international relations, I thought it would also be interesting to look at the intersection of geopolitics and geoeconomics, because after all, blue economy has a political rationale. But to do the job better, we have a very eclectic panel with us. And I'm sure their insights and interventions would be very useful to better understand the prospects and challenges in developing a sustainable strategy on blue economy, especially in the context of India's extended neighborhood. So we'll stick to the same format as we've been following. I'll invite all of you one by one to have your opening remarks, followed by the questions from the chair, and thereafter, towards the end, we can have a short Q&A with the audience. That sounds perfect to all of you. So I would first invite Greg. He has a PowerPoint presentation, I believe.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sure the PowerPoint presentation is up now. Well, let me start by thanking Ambassador General, trustees of the PIC for the invitation to be here. And I'd also like to shout out to the team behind the administration of this event. To Geeta and Koina and Chinmay and Praneet and Athav and Yosh and all of the other members of the team, thank you for making me feel like I've been surrounded by a group of new friends for the past few days. I want to spend a few minutes providing an Australian perspective on the blue economy, telling you a little bit about the work that we do, and hopefully then end on a slightly provocative note. So everyone's talking about the blue economy, and they're doing it at multiple levels. They're doing it multilaterally and globally through organisations like the UN. They're doing it regionally through organisations like ASEAN, and they're doing it nationally. India's got a draft policy, Australia's got a sustainable oceans policy that's about to be released, and most nations in our region are looking at the blue economy. They all define it differently, but there tend to be two principles that underpin everyone's definition. The first is it's about economic activity that happens in or on or is driven by some part of the ocean. And as Mansi said, the second is about incorporating some notion of sustainability. When we look at Australia, 85% of our population lives on or near the ocean. And we have one of the world's longest coastlines. It's about 26,000 kilometres, so it's about 3.5 times the length of India's coastline, and it's about 20 times the size of Sri Lanka's coastline. So not surprisingly, Australia's ocean industries already make a very significant contribution to our economy, and like every nation, we have aspirations for that to grow. And there's clearly potential for that growth. So this slide, hopefully, if I can get it up. So this slide shows a little bit of work that my organisation's done, and it looks at the potential for offshore wind. And what it effectively shows is, notwithstanding there's not a single propeller spinning currently in the ocean in Australia, there's enough energy out there close to infrastructure and close to population centres that if you really wanted to, you could replace the entire Australian electricity grid with offshore wind and you'd have more than enough power. And realising this potential is where my organisation comes in. We have more than 40 participants. They're drawn from 9 countries around the world, and they're really companies and governments and research institutions that collectively are trying to move sustainable seafood production offshore and generate renewable energy out there. And our work is really twofold. Firstly, we're trying to help build the policy and regulatory and governance environment that's necessary for future investment. And in many cases, that environment doesn't exist currently. So all of us could have a lazy $1 billion and want to spend it on offshore aquaculture in Australia, and we go online and say, where's the permit to apply for? And there wouldn't be one because there is no regulatory framework. The second thing we do is we're actually in the water testing new technology and approaches. And that's very important, and I want to return to this. It's connecting policy and regulations with real action. So while on the one hand we're working on Australia's new Sustainable Oceans Plan and regulatory frameworks, we also have wave energy devices in 2 places in the Indian Ocean. We're growing out temperature-tolerant strains of giant kelp in the Southern Ocean. We've got a novel fish pen design being tested in Singapore. We're the only organisation in Australia with permission to grow finfish in pens in national waters. And on March the 7th, I'll be launching our new hydrogen electrolyser. And the great thing about the blue economy is, of course, there's so much room out there. And this is the picture that we all tend to have in our minds whenever we talk about the blue economy. This great untapped field of opportunity where nothing happens. But as with all things, it's not quite that simple. So this is some work that was done in Belgium by one of our participants. Now, they have a 67-kilometre long coastline. And look at the complexity of integrating existing users of the ocean with potential new users of the ocean. The ocean is already very crowded, and there's a very complex web of users out there. So accommodating the aspirations of existing players while creating space and opportunity for new players is really challenging. And it's particularly challenging when you think about the interests and activities beyond national jurisdictions. So this is one of the reasons why under UNCLOS we've recently had the BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, and it's also an issue that's very live in the moment in the context of seabed mining. I want to finish my brief introductory comments by just talking about a few of these key challenges I see, because like all challenges, they represent opportunities. Deploying a new offshore energy project of any scale requires a big industrial port on an almost dedicated basis. We don't have any to spare in Australia. Government consent is difficult and time-consuming to obtain, and in some cases, as I said, there is no consenting framework in place at all. Offshore solutions require offshore engineering and technology and the supply chain to match. But in a country like Australia, which has a very small economy, we can't possibly generate all the innovation and all of the manufacturing capacity that's necessary to do this stuff commercially and at scale. And climate change is fundamentally changing the operating environment. The water is getting warmer, it's getting higher, it's getting more acidic, and it's holding less oxygen. And that poses fundamental challenges to existing operators in the blue economy. And then there's this final challenge, the challenge of personal ownership. Because at the end of the day, the ocean really is the last global commons, and we all feel a sense of ownership with it, and we all feel a sense of affinity towards it. And at the end of the day, economics is actually about the behaviour of individuals. So going forward in the blue economy, we need to be really cognizant of the way people feel about the use of their oceans. There's a great opportunity for collaboration on all of these issues, and I've been struck when I read India's blue economy policy on the way over about the number of these issues that I've nominated that are also nominated in the Indian context. And we have platforms for collaboration. There's any number of bilateral and multilateral agreements in place between individual countries and multiple countries, which in theory should provide a platform. So let me end on a slightly controversial note. So one of those agreements I read about today is the Australia-India Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative collaboration. Now that focuses on marine ecology and the blue economy. And of course it's also consistent and overarched by the Quad, or I haven't read the paper today, it might be the Triad for all I know. But here's the thing. I work in the blue economy in Australia every day, and I run an organisation that is full of deeply committed, deeply influential people in the blue economy space, and none of us have heard of this agreement. And this is so often the case in the ocean space. There are any number of bilateral and multilateral agreements with great ambitions that could be used to provide platforms for collaboration, but they are not connected with the industry and other users that are actually out there in the ocean every day undertaking activity. So my great plea for all governments as we go forward is, please, when we negotiate these bilateral and multilateral agreements with the best intentions in the world, let's make sure we include the people that are actually out there on the ocean who will actually be the ones that drive growth of the blue economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I think those were very valid points, and I'm sure when we come back for questions, that will be, some thought on these bottlenecks and challenges. I would now move to Subhashini Abhay-Singhe and invite her to share her insights on, maybe to begin with Sri Lanka's, efforts and initiatives towards developing a pragmatic ocean strategy.
So to Sri Lanka, the blue economy concept and the frameworks are very new to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka does not have a national blue economy framework. But what I want to share with you, maybe quickly, some numbers in terms of how important the Indian Ocean and the ocean resources for the economy and livelihoods of the people living in the region. And maybe highlight some of the challenges we are facing today, and especially from a perspective of Sri Lanka. So to give some perspective, coastal and marine tourism is critically important for the Indian littoral states and island states of the Indian Ocean. And of all the tourism activities that is taking place, around 70% is actually related to coastal and maritime tourism, which shows how important it is for this region. And 15% of the world's fish production happens in Indian Ocean. And sadly, it is also a hotspot of in the IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And thirdly, I think Indian Ocean is increasingly becoming an arena of great power competition. And part of that is simply because of the importance of Indian Ocean for the global trade. Indian Ocean carries 50% of world's containerized cargo, 1/3 of bulk cargo, and 2/3 of oil shipments. And it's not just the sheer importance of Indian Ocean for the well-being of the people in the region, but also outside the region. And it is even more important simply because of the vulnerability of this traffic to disruption, mainly because of strategic choke points through which this trade flows. For example, the Hormuz Strait, which is a choke point, is a narrow sea lane, which is very vulnerable to any sort of disruption. It can be piracy, it can be tourism, it can be any other challenge. 1/5 of oil shipments pass through Strait of Hormuz, and we all know about the Strait of Malacca, where about over 90,000 ships go through every year. And these choke points create security and energy security and other economic security concerns, not only for countries in the region, but outside the region. And that is why it has become a hotspot for geopolitical contestation. And now I come to Sri Lanka, a country that is strategically located in the Indian Ocean, obviously because of its location closer to east-west shipping lanes and the close proximity to India, puts it at the forefront of this geopolitical contestation. And Of course, maritime and marine and coastal tourism is critical for Sri Lanka in terms of it's the third largest foreign source of foreign exchange, a critical sector which provides livelihood to many, and fisheries, it is the same. But I would like to talk about, because whatever challenges Sri Lanka face in the fisheries and to maritime tourism would be very common across every other country. That is why I want to focus on two other sectors that are very critically important, because we feel that the position of Sri Lanka brings challenges maybe unique to the country as well. One is the ocean as a source of energy. So we know the Gulf of Mannar and the Mannar Basin. Gulf of Mannar has the highest potential of offshore wind farms in Sri Lanka. And Mannar Basin, Sri Lanka has discovered, has oil and gas deposits, and of course, quite undeveloped and unexplored. But there is potential. But at the same time, Gulf of Mannar is a very sensitive area for India in terms of national security. And Sri Lanka does not have the technical capacity or the financial resources to actually make use of these resources. And we constantly depend on foreign assistance to do so. And navigating these sensitivities on where do we get assistance, what kind of assistance, in what form is a critical challenge given the delicate management of the national security concerns of India and Sri Lanka's economic needs. The second one that I will quickly talk about is, of course, the port sector. In a region where the geopolitical contestations are intensifying, ports are increasingly viewed as dual purpose. It's not just for commercial purposes. These can be used for military purposes. And within such a tense environment for Sri Lanka, we are like, okay, we want to use it for commercial purposes and we want economic benefits. But within the environment we live in, there is growing fear of them being dual purpose. And for Sri Lanka as a transshipment hub in the Indian Ocean, managing these concerns and interests of major powers in the world against the economic priorities and needs of a small state island nation is a critical challenge that we need to sort of face and find ways to overcome. Maybe we can discuss about some of the solutions in the rounds to come. So I'll just leave there my opening remarks.
Thank you, Shubhashini, for very well encapsulation of the multifarious challenges and the tracks that we are looking at blue economy. If I could now bring in Additional Secretary Mr. Puneet Agarwal, and so if you could throw more light on how India is leveraging its blue diplomacy in its engagement with the extended neighborhood. And then, of course, more questions to follow after that.
Very good morning to all of you. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Mashelkar and Ambassador Bambawale for giving me this opportunity to be part of this distinguished panel here, and also organizing this conference in such a beautiful way. I would like to take all of you back in the past. Almost around 10 years back, Prime Minister had undertaken a visit of the countries in the Indian Ocean region, and this was to Mauritius, Seychelles, and Sri Lanka. And this was in 2015, and on the National Day of Mauritius, which is 12th of March, he announced the Saga Vision, which means basically security and growth for all in the region. And this has been the basis for our policy towards the states in the Indian Ocean region, and especially the small island developing states. We do say them as small island developing states, but we must remember that these are in true sense big ocean states, because they have a large exclusive economic zone, which is basically disproportionate to the size. So we're looking at our extended neighborhood, where we have these big ocean states with which we are engaging with. And we have to keep in mind that these ocean states have very limited awareness about the maritime domain, and not only very limited awareness about the maritime domain, but also very limited capacity to exploit their marine resources. So keeping these in mind, we have taken foreign policy outreach to these countries to see that how we can help them in this area. At the same time, we must also look and see that both COVID-19 and the Ukraine and the Middle East economic crisis, Middle East crisis have basically converted these island states into fragile economies. And this has also impacted their own capacities to see how they can exploit their marine resources, and therefore they have been now dependent on external players in the region to take forward their economic growth. As far as India is concerned, I would say that our focus has been on 3 issues. One is that we have to enable these countries to ensure that they have better awareness about their own maritime domain. And we have been doing through training, capacity building, and building the necessary infrastructure in this country so that they can have an effective information about their own maritime domain. Second, what we've been doing is that we've been providing them with various assets so that they can effectively monitor their marine waters, and this is very important for them to have a better understanding of what is going in their marine waters. This we have been doing through various initiatives, through exchange of information, through white shipping agreements, through placing their officers in the fusion center in Delhi, placing our own officers in the regional fusion centers, trying to build the national maritime information centers, and many other such initiatives which we have been undertaking in this region. And the third and the most important part is that we are trying to help them in sustainable development of their own marine resources and how they can exploit this marine resources sustainably while dealing with both traditional and non-traditional challenges, in particular the climate change related challenges which they are facing. So some of these areas where we have been helping them are basically related to renewable energy, to the fisheries sector, where we are helping them with fish processing units, and also trying to see that how they can also protect their own marine biodiversity reserves. There are also various other multilateral and plurilateral initiatives of which India is part and through which India has been helping this region. 2 of these initiatives have been run by India. One is the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, where SITS has been an important part of how we can use our knowledge as far as disaster resilient infrastructure is concerned to enable these small island developing states to develop infrastructure which is resilient in face of increasing challenges from climate change. We are also helping them through the International Solar Alliance to develop their capacity in the renewable energy. We've been also using IORA, Indian Ocean Commission, Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, then our own regional initiative of Colombo Security Conclave, and to see how we can enable some of these countries to better utilize their marine resources. We have also been collaborating in the Quad framework to see that some of the Quad expertise can be brought into to help these countries to exploit their marine resources. We've been also helping them in HADR and pollution control and many other such activities. So I would like to say that our cooperation is multifaceted, and we have been trying to see how we can truly implement the Sagar initiative, which our Prime Minister had announced 10 years back. Incidentally, PM would also be going to Mauritius on the same day this year, on 12th of March. He will be there, which will also be the 10th anniversary of the Sagar initiative. And we look forward to seeing how we can better help these countries in dealing with the challenges they are facing. I'll leave at this moment and maybe later elaborate on some of these initiatives.
Certainly. Thank you. And I would now invite Commander Arnab Das. I guess Mr. Agarwal touched upon maritime domain awareness, so he is our guy to inform better about it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, PIC, Dr. Mashelkar sir, Bambabale sir, for giving me this opportunity to, being a Punekar now, being able to speak. I'm going to talk much more basic than my co-panelist. I start by saying the Earth, when we talk about blue economy, the Earth is 75% water. 70% is marine and 5% fresh water. In that, I would also like to say that 90+% of challenges, resources, and opportunities lie below the surface of the water. I'm sure nobody will disagree with that. Having said that, underwater domain awareness becomes a very critical aspect to be discussed. And that's what is my focus. Now, taking it forward, as the chair also started by saying, there's a lot of intersection of multiple stakeholders. As I have written in my title, Safe, Secure, Sustainable Growth. Safe is safety from natural disasters. We've been talking about climate change. Have we been able to even model what is climate change and what's lying ahead? And we have to predict and then chart our course so that we are there at the right place, not kind of just monitor the developments after they have happened. The second is security. I mean, security becomes such a big thing, and the theme of this 3-day event is also fragmentation. How do we overcome fragmentation? And if you see, when we talk about the underwater, there are so many ministries who are responsible and so many ministries who are trying to regulate. And there's a lot of kind of confusion, if I may use the word. And then, of course, sustainable. Now, sustainability, many times we confuse it just with the ecological sustainability. There's so many aspects of sustainability that needs to be. Financial sustainability is also one. So that's something we need to look at. And of course, without growth, then why are we even wasting our time? Now, if you have to regulate anything, the first and foremost thing is you have to measure it. Or if you have to manage anything, unless you can measure what it is, measure the different dimensions, no management is possible. Now, the biggest thing that gets missed out when we talk about blue economy or anything regarding blue underwater is the tropical characteristics of the place that we are. The Indian Ocean region or the Indo-Pacific. Now, in the tropical waters, on one end, there is rich biodiversity, lot of resources, but on the other side, we are always at the receiving end. Now, the biggest challenge, if you have to see below the water, is the technology aspect or the science of it. Acoustics is the only means to see below the water. Acoustics suffers 60% degradation. I mean, the typical sonar technology, which basically uses acoustic means, suffers 60% degradation when it is used in the tropical waters. Now, if the instrument that you're using is suffering 60% degradation, then what are we doing and how do we go forward? And, you know, we've been running to the West. I mean, even in so many aspects, we are now running to the Nordic countries. Do they understand the tropical conditions? We need to answer that question. So that's something very important. We need to front load the tropical characteristics if we have to really deal with that. And it has to be localized. Now, we keep talking about Indo-Pacific. By definition, I mean, there is one definition that Indo-Pacific is from Hollywood to Bollywood, but the more specific definition is that the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So the tropical characteristics, now even if India has to be a big player in the Indo-Pacific, unless we take care of this, and if we can take care of this, we can also, I mean, Puneet sir mentioned about the Sagar vision. One of the main tenets of that is that we want to play a leadership role. How do we play a leadership role? First, we are able to tackle our own capacity and capability building issue and then extend this as a diplomatic tool. Now, people, economy, nature becomes a very important thing, whatever we want to do. So there is so many issues of livelihood loss and, you know, our communities are getting completely ignored. Economy is a very important thing. There are various aspects. I'll not go into the details. And of course, nature. I mean, these are the triple bottom line that we need to address. Now, one of the terms that probably can handle what we are talking about is maritime domain awareness. This has become but my problem with this term, maritime domain awareness or MDA, is that it has remained an event-driven formulation. After the 9/11 in the West and 26/11 here. And the bigger problem is it has remained security-driven. And the challenge with security-driven formulations is that they want exclusive. Other stakeholders find it very hard to participate. And the security budget does not have the ability to do the heavy lifting for capacity building. So we have to flag this. Now, these are the stakeholders. I'll not I'll go straight away. Now, even if, when we say underwater, the riverine river systems are also equally important. Now, you look at, the various aspects. Kasab came by a surface boat. We are still hoping that the next guy will also use a surface boat, not a drone, underwater drone. Now, even kids are using underwater drone technology, so we need to be careful. Now, blue economy, energy security. I mean, Indian Ocean is a hub of energy security. But even food security, we are increasingly looking at the oceans for food security. But if you look at the fishing sector, on one end, we have the fish stock on the decline since 1996, but on the other end, the bycatch is of the order of 80%. How do we rationalize this? It has to be underwater domain awareness becomes a very important part. And deep sea mining is such a big thing. 6 times more rare earth metals for EV is in the oceans. The various aspects, I think we don't have too much time, so I'll quickly go through just to give you a sense of how big this whole underwater domain awareness is. Disaster management. I mean, it would be too much for me to say that we can prevent a disaster to happen, but definitely with early warning, we can minimize the loss of life and property. Just to quickly, so science and technology. Now, Kiran Majumdar ma'am had talked about the science of it, and we have to focus on science. If we understand the science, then technology can be developed. But if you can't understand the science of the tropical waters, you can't do it. So when we talk about digital, I mean, everybody understands digital transformation is the only thing. But if your sonar is giving such poor performance and we continue to depend on the West for the sonar technology, I think we need to look inwards. So this is what it is, and how do we leverage AI? I mean, like even say IUU, a very quick example, IUU fishing is such a big problem. Illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing is such a big problem, and our communities are really suffering. I mean, the fish stock is terribly, so somebody gave an example of the ice hockey and basketball that, you go there, predict where the ball will be and chase it. AI can help you to find where the stock is, and those culprits will come there. So our security forces can be there. I mean, this is such a vast ocean, 3.7 million square kilometers. So there's so many examples we can talk about. Now, this is the framework. I want everybody to go back with this picture in mind. The 4 stakeholders represent the 4 sides of the cube. But the core is the acoustic capacity and capability building. I mean, as a nation, it has to be a whole-of-nation approach. Unless we can get the acoustic technology going for us, we cannot move forward. I mean, and all of them, the pooling of resources and synergizing of effort is such an important thing that we need to look at. If you look at the vertical construct, we have very little understanding of, globally it says that we only know 5%. So there's so much to be done. So if you have to have a bottom-up approach. Typically, we go to the West, get the technology, get the know-how, and get the framework also. And if there is so much of disconnect between what the technology is giving us, 60% degradation of performance, it just doesn't touch anywhere. So it has to be a bottom-up approach, a lot of sensing, analysis, and then policy. Otherwise, it's completely disconnected. And this also shows these smaller cubes. I mean, we talk about demographic advantage. Our kids have a massive opportunity here. Every cube, we can divide it into 1,000 smaller cubes, and that is the startup opportunity. That is the research opportunity, that is the innovation opportunity that we need to look at. I mean, there's no time, but we can go on and on this. So marine spatial planning, my friend talked about MSP. Now MSP, EZ is going to be 3.7 million square kilometers. In the conventional way, in many organizations, people say, we have to put sensors. So how many sensors can you put? So modeling and simulation is the only approach, and this, what you're seeing, we have built this up without going to the sea, for the larger thing, but of course, field validation has to be done. There are above water data like AIS, automated identification, aerospace data, and various satellite pictures are there. That should be used to build the underwater picture. And then a little bit of validation. Then only we can cover that. I mean, the scale that we desire can only be done through modeling and simulation. It's a well-known technique. I mean, senior people know it. So I think, 2 more minutes, ma'am. Is it okay? Yeah. So now how do you go about acoustic capacity building? To see, to understand, and to share. To see is the sensor and the platform, whether it's an AUV or a surface platform, as a lot. Now, when we want to accelerate, of course, we can definitely go to our partners in the West to get the hardware. This is the hardware. But once the data is collected, it has to be an indigenous effort to understand the data analytics, the AI, everything has, and the local aspects, the understand part, and that's where a lot of innovation challenges can be put here. And the third is to share. Now, this is a very important thing. I mean, the real-time appreciation is so important. And most important, it has to be a user-friendly format. If it is a policymaker, he has the luxury of a big screen. But if it's a fisherman on the ground, it has to be a mobile app. And who else other than India can do this? I mean, if we talk about the Sagar vision, we can actually do it for ourselves. And I mean, we have so much talent. I mean, everybody knows it. The other part is the human resource part. This is another very important thing. I'll request you to pay a little attention to this. Now, to build those algorithms, you need some high-end data analysts. But once that data comes in, then we need multidisciplinary domain experts, right from geopolitics to political science to everything. And different aspects of the puzzle has to be looked at from different dimensions. But the third is more important for me. Field deployment specialists. Today, when we talk about developmental project, the indigenous community or the local community or the coastal communities are the biggest victim of this. Now, for waterfront management, don't you all agree that the fishermen, the coastal community or the riverine community, they are the far more equipped to handle this? A little bit of skilling, and they are part of the larger developmental process. Every big projects, they have to migrate, they have to run away, or they have been pushed out. But if we can bring them into the whole digital transformation process, this is such an easy thing to do. And they will, and now, many times the migrants have no ownership of the local conditions. Sustainability can be easily driven if they are part of it. And it will cost us half the money because they are at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Das. I think that rightly echoed what Dr. Mashelkar pointed out in his inaugural address, how to leverage India's affordable excellence. So with that, we would now have questions for all of you after those very interesting thoughts that you all shared. I'll start with Greg, of course. Greg, Blue Economy talks about sustainable utilization of ocean resources, but somewhere it connotes different meanings for different countries and even blocks for that matter. Like when we speak of global north, it is largely about oil spills and aquaculture and ocean health. When we speak of global south, it is about livelihood protection. It is about coastal communities, securing the low-income coastal communities. So, especially like in case of Australia, as you also pointed out in your presentation, it is predominantly characterized by offshore aquaculture, renewable energy production. So how do we, like your thoughts on reconciling, we're talking of a synergized approach, how do we reconcile these different perspectives in order to have a much robust, well-rounded strategy on blue economy?
So what a great question to start with. How do we reconcile different perspectives on sustainability? And I have to say, Mansi, we have challenges within Australia reconciling different perspectives on sustainability. And I know talking to large companies in Australia, they tell me that they have different classes of customers who themselves have different perspectives on what constitutes sustainability. In the Australian context, I think the key to growing confidence in industries behaving appropriately offshore is transparency. So there's a great deal of concern in Australia about the way industries now behave on the coastline. It's in relation to aquaculture, it's in relation to shipping, it's in relation to tourism. And we have very powerful communities who can use the regulatory environment to stop development proceeding, and they now are. And their principal concern is that doesn't look sustainable. And the challenge for us when we move into the offshore environment is to learn from the lessons of failure in the coastal environment and give those communities confidence that we understand the environment out there, we understand the impact we're having on it, we can demonstrate that our impact is negligible, or we can at least have a mature conversation with the community that says any form of industrial activity anywhere has a local environmental impact, but on balance, here are the benefits and here are the costs. Given that, are you prepared to approve this activity taking place? I think we need to have similar conversations in our relationship elsewhere in the region with other countries. I mean, the start of the conversation, I think, is to be open and blunt about what transparency, about what sustainability is. Because I can tell you, we have some countries who I won't name who come to Australia and say, we wish to grow a sustainable blue economy, and what that actually means is we want as much investment in our wild caught fishing industry as we can get from you. And I think Arnab made the point, we know that from the FAO statistics, 90% of the world's wild caught fisheries are already fished at or beyond their sustainable limits. So that's not sustainable, but in the context of a country that's trying to feed a subsistence population, that's about sustainable communities. So I think the start of the conversation is just to be open and honest about the definition and the framework we bring to the table and to look for common ground.
That's well put. Subhashini, if I could proceed to you, and again, like when we say South Asia, it enjoys unique, advantages when it comes to its geography. Now, but there are multifarious challenges as well when it comes to, developing a blue economy or steering the blue economic growth in the region. So how do we align these different national, pathways to industrialization? Because once we start the job at home, and then, of course, we can proceed and we can talk about leading the global efforts.
Yeah, I think one of the critical factors about the blue economy is all of the activities we are talking about and resources are transboundary in nature, which means unlike what you do within your land area, what you do out requires enormous amount of international collaboration and cooperation. And within because your title had this era of fragmentation, and that is what is going to be the most challenging thing, to say how can we cooperate and collaborate to make sure that the blue economy is sustained and all of us benefit from it. Because without that, it's very difficult for any one of us to be able to solve these problems. And smaller countries like us, obviously, with far less financial and technical capacity, suffer the most in this fragmented world. And just to give perspective for Sri Lanka, the exclusive economic zone of Sri Lanka is 8 times the size of its land area. That shows that actually there is a lot of untapped potential over there that we can make use of sustainably, but we need assistance, collaboration, and cooperation with others. And this is where I think things like, of course, what a smaller nation like Sri Lanka can do is create platforms for conversation. And I think Colombo Security Dialogue is one of such platforms. It has a lot more than maritime domain issues, but maritime security is one critical area that Colombo Security Dialogue talks about. I think Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, and Maldives are members of this. And then the Gold Dialogue, which is an international maritime conference Sri Lanka has started, I think, from 2011. And it started with about 11 countries originally, and the last 2023 conference had participation of over about 46 countries, which shows that that conference basically, again, creating a platform, a common platform for people in the region to come together and discuss and debate about maritime-related issues and concerns. And outside that, one of the other problems that we have in South Asia is sometimes our differences and disagreements are more prominent and keeps us apart than bringing us together to discuss ways to overcome common challenges and common threats. And this is, if you compare with ASEAN and South Asia, for example, one of the critical challenges we have is we do not have a regional framework to work within. And SAC has been a sick child for a long time, but now it feels like it's dead and gone, right? And today we're talking about BIMSTEC. Can actually BIMSTEC be a regional framework? And without that, whereas I was reading about ASEAN Blue Economy Framework and how ASEAN countries have worked together, it's not that ASEAN does not have differences or different challenges of different countries, but somehow they seem to still come together for common threats and common challenges. And for smaller countries like us, I mean, without India at the table, there is no regional framework for South Asia. So India is the country that is critical to be at the table. And for smaller countries like us, it's so important to have that regional framework. But that is, I wish I had a solution, but that is a struggle that South Asia faces and has been facing throughout.
That's a perfect note to move to the next speaker and throw my question. Sir, when it comes to small island states, very differing security perceptions with regard to China in the region. So how are we navigating the rough waters, and especially as Shivajani also mentioned, platforms like BIMSTEC, you also mentioned a lot of minilaterals and multilaterals that we are investing in. So how do we see this?
I think it's a very complex question. Let me try and see if I can do justice to that. I think the most important thing which we see is the fragility of these economies. And we see that quite evident in our neighborhood. And we know what the reasons are for the fragility and how they have been pushed into a debt trap. And what we see is that many of them have gone to the IMF program. It's not only Sri Lanka which has gone to the IMF program. We see in the past, Seychelles has gone there, Comoros, Madagascar. Many in the eastern coast of Africa have been there, which have gone through this IMF program. Maldives is on the verge of going to an IMF program. So we see that they have very limited economic capacity to undertake developmental activities. And what we have been trying to push these countries is to realize that it cannot be a debt-driven growth. And what we've been saying is that as far as India is concerned, we would be able to help them in an economic growth approach which is investment driven. And if they can create a right economic environment, we would definitely encourage Indian companies to invest in these countries and see that they are able to go on an economic recovery path. What we've been also trying to do is that instead of extending lines of credit, we've been trying to convert most of our projects on grant basis, so that we don't increase the debt burden and thereby thus push them further down the road. What we've been also offering them is lines of credit which are extremely concessional. I'm saying extremely concessional, that they are even better than what the multilateral institutions are offering them. And thereby in a sense, we are combining both grants and lines of credit to ensure that the kind of assistance which we give to them does not lead to further debt stress in those economies. What we have also seen is increasing military activities in our region, whether it's in the form of research vessels, whether it's in the form of mid-sea refueling of naval vessels. We've also seen extensive research as far as the undersea domain awareness is concerned in our region. And what we believe is that such research is basically looking at deployment of naval forces, including submarines in our region. And therefore, this has been a very important issue for us. And that is what we have been trying to, in a sense, raise with our neighbors in our extended neighborhood, trying to make them understand that these activities are not peaceful in nature, and therefore any attempt to, it could be a very simple OTR, but that OTR would enable in a sense, extending the outreach, extending the reach of such research vessels, and therefore this will not help in their own security, the security of India, as well as security of the wider region. And therefore, they should be extremely cautious while permitting such activities by giving them the access to the waters. So this definitely has been an issue of concern, and we have been trying to help these countries by enabling them to conduct such activities on their own, whether it's giving of naval platforms, aviation platforms, deputation of our experts, or even bringing their experts in India and training them on such activities. So our effort has been to ensure that it is the countries in our region are able to do these activities on their own, and the extra-regional plays are best avoided in our region.
Okay, Commander Das, of course, maritime security and blue economy are interdependent, because when we speak of protecting our ocean resources, it requires safeguarding navigation routes and enhanced maritime surveillance and enforcement. Now, one of the key issues is that of information sharing and making sense of that information. Like when I was doing my research project on Gujarat's coastal security, I happened to visit the Information Fusion Center in IMAC at Gurugram, and of course it was state-of-the-art, technology before me. I could see all the vessels, but then there was so much of information, and how do we translate that information, make sense of all that information in order to really, and then of course there are issues of like limited jurisdiction of law enforcement agencies as well, that is a constraint. So how do we like address that aspect when it comes to underwater domain awareness and maritime domain awareness and that?
I have to be diplomatic to answer that question, but I'm not a diplomat. But I'll take you on a little longer journey in that sense. In 2021, in the Quad summit in Tokyo, the leaders talked about data sharing, and they said for greater public good. Because the small island nations, developing nations, have a huge problem. There are a whole lot of HADR issues and everything. And all these multilateral forums, it doesn't excite the small island developing nations. I mean, they feel that it's, it's just not for us. And, so to basically counter that, there was a declaration on sharing data. So there were two things that were announced. One is the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and the second was the data sharing. Now, a lot of experts have written on it. There are two aspects to it. Now, data sharing sounds very good, but what is the mechanism for data sharing? I want data, does it come to my mobile? It doesn't happen so simply. So what is the mechanism? The mechanisms are these 8 centers. IFC IOR is one, and there is one in Singapore, Solomon Island. There are 8 such centers. Now, if you look at the construction of these centers, they are all military driven. Now, my question is, does the military understand what is greater public good? Does the military understand what does a fisherman require, what the community requires? What are the what is the format of data? And now to a fisherman, if you say the temperature is going up or down or salinity is going up, it just doesn't make any sense. Even, let me take you even a step further. Now, even if he's a shrimp farmer, he is only interested in a particular subspecies of shrimp. Unless he gets an information of that particular thing, that data has absolutely no relevance to him. So that's what I was telling you about the data share part. I mean, to see, to understand, and to share, it has to be highly customized. So where is this mechanism? So this is one criticism that people did. The second was that Hawkeye 360, and there are certain, companies in the West, I mean, the whole capitalistic system where they have invested significantly on, satellite data and various data acquisition. Now this is an return on investment, I mean, this is all that is there in the literature that I'm saying. So how does this excite the smaller countries or the communities who are suffering, right? So these mechanisms have to really translate it to the ground, and these are some of the mechanisms. Like, we have so many people getting into drones, so many people wanting to do this or that, but does it fit into the larger macro picture that we want to create? Unless that is so, then most of these efforts will never be able to combine to give us the bigger picture. So we need to, when we talk about innovation, we need to look at the larger puzzle. I mean, what is the larger global issue that we are trying to sort out, and what are those micro things? I mean, probably the framework that I discussed, what should be the policy intervention, what should be the technology intervention, and most importantly, what should be the capacity and capability building that we need to look at. I mean, I'm very sad to say, as we talk today, there is not a single academic institution in this country which teaches acoustics as a subject. We have 11,800 square kilometers. Earlier we used to talk about 7,500. It's 11,800 now. 11,008 kilometers, not square kilometers, kilometers of coastline, and then multiply that with, if the International Seabed Authority gives us permission, then it is 350 nautical miles of EZ. So that is the area that we are talking about. Now, presently, the maritime sector is only contributing less than 4% to the GDP. We have such a huge opportunity. So there's so much more to be done. I hope that answers your question.
My next question, where I can bring in perhaps both Greg and Subhashini, is related to financing of blue economy, actually. And the central promise of the Sustainable Development Goals is that investments should leave no one behind. However, research indicates otherwise. And data, in fact, shows that less than 10% of the blue economy finance was put into the critical marine sectors in Global South, such as aquatic foods, which are so vital in addressing the issue of food insecurity. So how do we ensure your thoughts on effectiveness of blue financing, if both of you could just...
So I'll make a couple of observations about blue finance. So the first is, the rhetoric would have you believe that the world is awash with lazy capital looking to invest in marine ventures, in the blue economy, in blue finance. But actually, if you talk to people on the ground, that is not the case. Often it's not the case because, and this is characteristic of the valley of death in every country that tries to take great ideas from proof of concept to commercial application, it's very difficult to achieve scale. It's very difficult to achieve scale on a reef restoration project in Indonesia to attract blue finance. It's very difficult to attract commercial scale on a wave energy converter that's been designed in Australia that needs to compete with the wind sector. So there is finance, but it's looking for very large projects, and to date in the blue economy, we haven't been able to generate those of sufficient scale to attract that capital investment. The other thing I would like to talk about is a lot is made of concepts like blue bonds, but at the end of the day, one of the principles that underpins a bond is there's a return. And when a lot of countries talk about blue bonds and blue finance, what they're talking about is untied investment and aid. And we do that in Australia too. So this is not a criticism, it's just an observation that I don't think the language we use in blue finance is particularly helpful, and I think it's misleading to think that there's a great deal of money ready to pour into small-scale projects, because it's the case with small-scale projects in any sector anywhere in the world. If you can't achieve commercial scale, and a lot of these projects can't because of where they are and what they're focused on, it's very difficult to liberate serious investment.
So I think for Sri Lanka, this is a critical question. Just like I said, we are just coming out of a debt crisis, and there is very likelihood we'll go into another also if we don't really solve many challenges we have. But looking back at the past experience of financing, I will focus on, of course, some of the areas that we brought financing into. These are basically the ports that has got quite a lot of financing, and even energy. So I think one of the critical problems we've identified in countries like Sri Lanka is, look, we have to take responsibility for how we finance, what we finance, especially on feasibility, environment, viability, which has been one of the weakest areas when we finance projects in Sri Lanka. So maybe, I don't know how many of you know, under the IMF program, Sri Lanka for the first time did a governance diagnostic assessment called IMF GDA. And this is the first done for an Asian country. But I think there is a realization at the bottom of our crisis it's not really an economic crisis, but it's a governance crisis. And it's a governance crisis in terms of actually exactly one of the critical problems. We don't have the correct regulatory frameworks, right checks and balances. There is no accountability, no transparency. And as a result, all these financing decisions Sri Lanka has taken over the years has been captured by vested interests. Vested interests in Sri Lanka and outside at the expense of public interest. And so one of the critical recommendations of the IMF GDA, which is, it is important for blue economy investments and overall across every investment, but it is really to fix Sri Lanka's regulatory framework, right? One of the critical factors we talk about debt, public procurement is debt-driven, right? And public procurement decisions, being accountable, transparent, all of that is critical. So I think one of the areas is that. Second, one of the most critical areas is, are we going to be driven by interests and concerns or geopolitical pressures of external parties, or how can we make sure our investment decisions are driven by priorities and needs of the country? And that means Sri Lanka has to figure out our own priorities. So there was this tweet that I often quote, which is, of course, like somebody cynically has put in saying, because Sri Lankans are always about other countries having, vested interests about Sri Lanka's location. So this guy was written saying, China has a plan for Colombo Port, India has a plan for Colombo Port, America has a plan for Colombo, where is Sri Lanka's plan for Colombo Port? It just captures, in summary, actually, Sri Lanka for a long time wanted to be a maritime logistics hub, but we have never had a national policy or an action plan for Sri Lanka to be a maritime and logistics hub. So really understanding and getting our priorities right, and this is also a recognition in the IMF GDA saying actually Sri Lanka doesn't have a proper public investment plan. We don't know what our priorities are, and as a result, we are driven by vested interests of both external and local parties and end up doing projects that are not necessarily priority, that are not necessarily properly evaluated. So the third one is really transparency. I think we live in a world where there is so much suspicion among countries, and being at a location like Sri Lanka, we can also compound those suspicions and create further, instead of mitigating, we can contribute to it. So transparency remains critical about our engagements, whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's America. So what we are saying is we have a Right to Information Act, which is very powerful, which was passed in 2016, unfortunately, which requires Sri Lankan government to disclose extensive information proactively to people about the agreements, the contracts, even if it is public-private partnerships, what incentives are given. Unfortunately, the compliance remains low. Actually, if things are a lot more transparent, and if it is very clear that Sri Lanka is pursuing its economic interest, and it is doing so within a proper framework, I think it could help. Actually, Sri Lanka could contribute to manage the geopolitical tensions better. So going forward, I hope the crisis has taught us a lesson, and that we come out stronger and better than we were before.
Thank you, Shubhashini. I think that again become a resonant, theme: institutional bottlenecks, transparency, regulatory framework. So with this, if I could again bring in Additional Secretary Mr. Puneet Agarwal and ask you, sir, that this is a very ambitious project that we are embarking on. But it would also mean driving institutional reforms and taking into issues of scale, culture, and capacity. So how do we bridge this gap, of course, from an Indian point of view, how do we bridge this gap between global expectations and local reality? I mean, I'm also referring to one of the comments that was made in a previous session where we did mention that we need to create the right ecosystem to facilitate all of this. So your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, because this is one area which we have been taking very seriously, and we have this National Center for Good Governance in India. So what we are doing is that we are using that National Center for Good Governance to expose the decision makers in these countries to what India has done in these areas. So like we have a agreement with Maldives where we have already trained 1,000 of the civil servants and exposed them to the various initiatives which Government of India has undertaken and which have been highly successful. We have renewed that agreement with them. We similarly recently signed an agreement with Sri Lanka where 1,500 of the civil servants will come to India over a period of 3 to 5 years, and they will get exposed to various initiatives in digital public infrastructure, some initiatives like Gati Shakti, then how we do maintain our land records and customs and many other things. We do have similar arrangements with Mauritius and Seychelles, and we are trying to do same with Madagascar and Comoros. So what we are trying to do is that through this, we are exposing them to some of the governance practices which are there in India and which have been very successful. And through that to see if they wish to, in a sense, wish to replicate similar initiatives in their own country. Like what we have seen is that in case of Mauritius, they have just opened Jan Aushadhi Kendra and basically importing generic medicines from India so that their own cost of health gets reduced significantly. We are implementing the Aadhaar project in Sri Lanka, which will also enable them to take a lot of digital initiatives which have been highly successful in India. Similarly, with Maldives, we are trying to see if, this is a request from Maldives itself, whether UPI can be made the national payment gateway. So we are working on in these areas to see how we can help them in their own economic and development needs and how they can benefit from some of the initiatives which Government of India has taken domestically.
I have one question and one then common question that I'll throw to all of you, to Commander Das, because that is something that I picked up from your presentation when you said that MDA is largely security driven and not including multiple stakeholders. So I just wanted to know, like, how do we go about it, in terms of some of the initiatives and suggestions that you could
Thank you.
make in that
That's
direction.
a very important question. I mean, when I say security driven, largely, there is a lot of restrictions put on other stakeholders. But see, unless the other stakeholders, I mean, if you don't get the blue economy, where does the money come from? If you don't get the science and technology, stakeholders, where does the technology come from? And environment and sustainability will become very important. And all of them pooling in resources and synergizing effort will definitely, kind of help in taking it forward. So synergistic effort, I think the UDA framework, as I showed, that's the best model. I mean, here we have to look at 5 pillars: research, innovation, academic curriculum, skilling, and strategy. And all these 5 have to work together. Typically, even in these also we see fragmentation. So we have to look at it and how it can all come together is probably, because there's less of time, so I don't know.
Just one quick question before I invite questions from the audience, because I could not help include this question and any one of you could wish to respond to it, because we are talking of resilience and sustainability. So of course, how do we include gender in blue economy? Because there was a report from Food and Agricultural Organization which says that women have been traditionally very active participants in the coastal ecosystem, but when it comes to blue economy, their participation is less, in the less lucrative activities or indirect and informal. So lessons from Sri Lanka, or some observations from the field, since you are all much better experts than me in this, sector. So your thoughts on how do we address this glaring issue?
I'll make a quick observation, and this is specifically about Australia because it's the environment I know best. So I've got a good friend who says, if you've been a leader in a system for more than 2 years and the system is broken, then you're part of the problem. And my observation about the Australian system, which has a number of challenges and problems, is by and large every senior leader looks like me. It's a white Anglo-Saxon male in his 50s or 60s who's been doing it for 20 years. And what you're struck by when you come to the equivalent in Australia of a forum like this is the energy and the ideas are held disproportionately by 20 and 30 and 40-year-old women. And I sit there and go, I don't have a single idea that people in this room don't have, and they've got much more energy than me. And I think there is a real need for my generation in Australia to step aside and to say, we're here if you want support or you want some advice or some mentoring, but it's time for you to take the baton because we haven't done a great job. But that's purely about the Australian context. I offer no observations on any other country.
We normally in our projects in our neighborhood, we do go by the priorities and the developmental needs of our neighbors. And definitely women empowerment is one area where Prime Minister has a special focus. And he does again and again tell us that this should be an area where we should help other countries, where we ourselves have very good examples of how women empowerment has taken place in India. And I would not get into the blue economy, but the white revolution which happened in India is a very leading example of that. And this was something which we are trying to see if we could do in Sri Lanka, where by developing the dairy sector and see that in some way the Indian cooperative movement in the dairy sector is replicated in Sri Lanka, and the women in particular are helped by that.
Thank you so much. The clock is ticking, and I was just making sure we are on time. So just one question from the audience. Okay, two questions? Okay, fine. One from this side, one from a lady, and one from here, if I can exercise my right as a chair. Okay,
Thank you. So thank you for the insightful session. My name is Mugdha Satpute. I have a question from international law perspective and regional collaboration. So what are your views on the loopholes in the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas and ambiguities in its interpretation which are used by nations for their selfish interest? For example, in the marine conservation, Australia has a strong approach towards scientific research whaling, and as well as maritime sovereignty of nations, wherein India, Sri Lanka and Australia are facing issues in their neighborhood. Thank you.
We can also have the second question, and then we go for the responses.
Thank you. I'm Vijay Safekar. I'm retired Indian Coast Guard officer. My question is about IUU fishing. It was mentioned that illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing being biggest of the concerns for Indian Ocean region. Now we know that the most large portion of this unreported, or for that matter reported fishing, is carried out by the entities in Indian Ocean who come from outside Indian Ocean region. Now in the context of sustainable exploitation of marine resources and livelihood protection, what do you think we can do to protect the interest of the coastal communities of Indian Ocean region? Thank you.
Was it meant for any specific panelist?
Panelists mentioned about IUU.
I think even UNCLOS, I'll just quickly mention. Yes, see, UNCLOS was written 30, 40 years back, so, and the means have changed, the technology has changed. So like what Puneet sir had mentioned, UNCLOS allows, deploying AUVs for underwater research purpose. But that research purpose, how do you define what is the end use of that research purpose? I mean, somebody may say, you need, like the MH370, when it fell into the sea and the search team had to start, it took them 1 year to first develop charts of the right resolution so that they can deploy AUVs for the search. 1 year. And in the Indian Ocean, we still don't have that data. So that is, but now, like what sir said, that Chinese research ships are coming. Now once that they get that data, now AUVs can be deployed for research, for finding minerals, even for military purposes. So it's a very thin line. How do you define that? So now UNCLOS has to kind of look at, like now if a submarine in international waters should not be submerged, now how do you deal with AUVs, or there are much bigger UUVs that are there. How do you deal with them? So there's a lot of gray area. So of course, international community has to get together. And then also, the relevance of UN is also being discussed. So I think I'll leave it at that. So talking about the IUU fishing, this is a multi-layered question. So one is the technology and the means and the capacity of our regulatory and the monitoring mechanism, right? We just came back after a field visit to Gujarat and Maharashtra. Now the whole coast also is divided between Marine Police, Coast Guard, and then Navy. So bigger ships is one aspect. Probably Navy is equipped and it has. But if you look at the coast, I mean, Marine Police Cape after the 2611, now they don't have, I mean, I can tell you being a naval officer, after so many years, we can still discuss our maintenance procedures and, there can be certain things we can say. But imagine a new force. They have such a big, they have invested, but even if they have 10 boats, maybe half of, 1.5 is available for deployment. And even, the motivation and various other competence of the people who have to regulate is also a question that we need to look at. But it is such a vast area given to them. Now, where should they be? So that's what in my talk I said that we can do a lot of technology, like the way now Coast Guard does anti-piracy, a lot of AI's data analytics is done. You can't be there everywhere. So where do you go? So it has to percolate down to the level where everybody can use technology. And also the whole mechanism, the policy intervention also has to be of a different kind. And then capacity building would be the biggest thing. Even at the policy making level, the importance, humans are typically terrestrial creatures. So we don't see too much in the water. So there's a lot of work to be done in that sense. So, but technology will be the main kind of strength that we'll have to develop.
Okay, so with that, we come to a close of this session. And just one remark, because once somebody told me that blue economy is like building a ship which is still sailing. So the work in progress, but very many thanks to all of you for joining us and also to the audience. Thank you. Over to Vandana.
Thank you so much for an amazing discussion. I'd like to invite Ambassador Bambavale to come up, the convener of AED, to present some mementos and tokens of appreciation. Could we start with Additional Secretary Puneet Agrawal, please? Dr. Commander Arnab Das? Oh, sorry, okay. To Subhashini Abhisinkhya. To Greg Johannes. And to Dr. Mansi Singh. And we've done Commander Arnab Das as well. Let's get a group photo at the front then. Thank you so much. If I could ask the Ambassador to stay on the stage. And to formally close this year's Asia Economic Dialogues, I'd like to hand over to Ambassador Bambavale, our convener of Asia Economic Dialogues 2025, for the closing and the vote of thanks. Please give him a big round of applause.
Well, it's been 48 hours stretched over 3 days, but we come to what I believe, and the Pune International Center believes, to be a very successful conclusion of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2025. We discussed many important issues which animate not just people in India, but also animate people across the world, across the globe. Whether it was AI, artificial intelligence, or whether it was cyber security and cyber resilience, the blue economy that we just listened to, a new concept which is still developing, a ship which is sailed but which is still half built, as the chair had described it. MSMEs, a very important part of the global economy, not just merely in India, but also in countries like Germany, Japan, and across the globe. So we did discuss many, many issues in this particular edition of the Asia Economic Dialogue. And I think it is incumbent on me at this stage to thank not merely the speakers who came from near as well as far, came from across the globe to be with us. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the many volunteers who worked tirelessly to make this particular edition of the Asia Economic Dialogue a success. But most of all, I would like to thank all of you, the audience, for having come out to listen to these very technical and specialized subjects. So I think a loud round of applause for all of us for being here over the last 48 hours, and thank you very much. Let me say that, the Ministry of External Affairs and our sponsors, and I thank all of them too, are quite satisfied with the way the Asia Economic Dialogue is developing. And as Dr. Mashelkar shared with you in his opening remarks 3 days ago, 48 hours ago, that our goal, what we are aiming at, is to become the Davos of the East, where people from academia, people from governments, people from businesses, small businesses included, would come together and talk about important issues which animate all of us as we move ahead. Yesterday, I felt the International Monetary System panel was very, very good. And it was heartening to know that despite Trump 2.0, that what we are talking about in terms of trying to do international trade in other currencies like the Chinese renminbi yuan or the Indian rupee is only at the margins. The bulk of trade continues to be in the US dollar. So I think that will be a good takeaway from President Trump as well as for Prime Minister Modi. There is one particular person who I have to thank, and that is our MC, Vandana Saxena Poria. And I'd like to invite her onto the stage so that we can present her with one of the gifts that we have been handing out. But Vandana, thank you so much for everything you've done so tirelessly and so well over the last 2 days, being the MC of this entire conference. A very important job. Vandana, I'd like to invite you on stage to receive a small token of our appreciation. A few words about the Asia Economic Dialogue as we look ahead. I think we have a platform on which to build further. I can assure all of you that not just we in Pune and the Pune International Center, but also our sponsors, including the Ministry of External Affairs, is very, very happy to have this dialogue outside of New Delhi here in Pune. And a loud round of applause for that, please. We do face some difficulties sometimes in bringing in government officials, government ministers. You saw this morning that the Secretary of the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises addressed us from Delhi. But we will not change the location of this particular international conference. I think the Government of India, the Ministry of External Affairs, and beyond it, the Government of India is very, very keen to get feedback from across the country, including from here in Pune. So one thing I can assure you is that we will continue to do this dialogue here in our lovely city of Pune and give feedback to the government, which is from our hearts and from our heads. I would also like to point out that the Pune International Center now has its own new campus. And I would suggest to Geeta if she could take some of our foreign delegates, our foreign speakers, to our new campus later today, so that next year we hope to do this dialogue not in the JW Marriott, but on our own campus of the Pune International Center. We were in Delhi recently for gathering of think tanks from across India. And guess what many of those people who represented other think tanks said to us? They said to us that of all the think tanks in India right now, the Pune International Center has the best campus, the best facilities, and the best infrastructure. And for that, of course, we have to thank our president, Dr. Mashelkar. Sir, thank you very much, not only for the new campus, but also for supporting the Asia Economic Dialogue. And in absentia, I must also thank our Vice President, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who is a very important part of our activity. So, ladies and gentlemen, with those kind words, I think we bring Asia Economic Dialogue 2025 to a successful conclusion. A loud round of applause for that. And as I hand back, let me hand back the stage to Vandana for one last occasion, one last time this year. And let me also say that we hope to see her again next year at Asia Economic Dialogue 2026.
Thank you. Now, just to close the conference, so I don't know if you remember, but last year, so those of you who were here last year will know that I did a little AI. I went into ChatGPT and I did a little poem. So last night I was at home and my mum, who's 84, was there. And she saw me on the computer and she said, "What are you doing?" So I told her about the Asia Economic Dialogues. And my mother, most of you will not know this, she's actually a very well-known Hindi writer and poet. And she's received awards from the President and the Prime Minister of India. So she listened to all the themes that we'd spoken about. And she woke me up this morning and she said, "I've written something." And so our last comment, or my last comment to her last night was, I thought it was an amazing dialogue, but if I was Mother India, if I was Bharat Ma, what would I be saying to the Asia Economic Dialogue? And that was my parting comment to my mum. And this morning I woke up and she'd written a very small poem that I shared with Dr. Mashelkar earlier. I couldn't find you, Ambassador Bambavale, so I apologize. And Dr. Mashelkar said we should read this. And so I'd like to ask Director Nitin of PIC to come up onto the stage and read this very short statement from my mum, or poem from my mother, who has asked us all to think about our position as India, not as a nation, but as the whole of India. So Nitinji, would you mind coming up? And thank you, Dr. Mashelkar, for the opportunity.
So Vandana has done a one-up on all of us. She'll ensure that it is her mother who has the last word. It's a poem I'm just reading out. It's titled Desh Ki Pukar by Usha Raje Saxena. देश की पुकार है कि सब एक साथ हो, साथ में प्रयास हो कि एक मूल मंत्र हो, एक ही लक्ष्य हो कि देश का विकास हो, मन में विश्वास हो कि सबका साथ है तो देश का विकास है। ये नारा नहीं, मेरा अटल विश्वास है कि सबका साथ है तो सबका विकास है। Thank you. Thank you, Vandana. I have read that out because Vandana is better at speaking English.
Fir bhi dil hai Hindustani. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to invite you to continue the important discussions over lunch, where dialogue fosters collaboration and ideas pave way for action. Please join us at lunch. This is Vandana Saxena Puria, your MC for today, signing out. Thank you.